It was late October, 2021. I remember that because Halloween was just a week away, and everything felt a bit colder than usual that year, both in weather and in vibe. At the time I was living in northern Oregon, just outside Eugene, where the woods go deep, and the silence can feel like it's watching you. My friend Kevin had been pushing me to do a camping trip for weeks. He had just gotten out of a brutal breakup and said he needed some off-grid time. No phones, no people, just trees and silence. I wasn't much of a camper, but I figured one weekend in the woods wouldn't kill me. Turns out I wasn't totally right about that. Kevin found this spot online, a place called Glover's Hollow, tucked away somewhere between the Willamette National Forest and a series of logging trails that hadn't been maintained in decades. There were no official campgrounds, just patches of semi-flat land and old fire rings made from stone. It wasn't on Google Maps. It wasn't on any regular hiking app either. Kevin found it on some obscure forum where people posted sacred camping spots, basically places you go when you want to be left alone. We packed light, just sleeping bags, a tent, flashlights, water jugs, some canned food, and a propane stove. I brought my dad's old hunting knife, more for comfort than anything else. Kevin insisted on bringing a small Bluetooth speaker, which I thought was dumb at the time. We were supposed to be unplugging, not blasting music, but he said he needed something normal out there, just in case it got too quiet. We left Friday morning around 10 a.m. The first few hours were normal. Gas station coffee, junk food, driving through thickening woods. It was when we took the logging trail turnoff that things started to feel weird. The road was mostly dirt and broken rock. No signs, no fences, just deep woods on both sides. At one point, we passed what looked like an old wooden structure, maybe a shack or a hunter's blind, completely collapsed in on itself and rotting. Kevin pointed at it and joked, "Bet that's where they sacrifice tourists." We both laughed at the time. Eventually, we reached this small clearing next to a sloped ridge. There was a ring of rocks in the center, like someone had made a fire pit years ago. No other cars, no signs of people. It was perfect. Too perfect. I should have trusted that instinct. We set up the tent, unloaded our gear, and cracked open a couple of beers while the sun started to dip behind the trees. The quiet was intense. No distant highways, no planes overhead, not even birds chirping. It was the kind of silence that feels unnatural, like something's waiting to make noise, but hasn't yet. Kevin put on some music. I remember it was Fleetwood Mac, kind of an odd vibe for the woods, but somehow it fit. We sat around the fire pit, even though we didn't light anything yet, just talking, trading stories, trying to shake that quiet. And then, right around sundown, something strange happened. We heard a voice, not a loud one, not screaming or panicked, just a voice maybe 50 feet away, just beyond the tree line. It said, "Hey there, you got a fire going?" Kevin paused the music immediately. We both looked at each other like, "Did you hear that too?" I called out, "Hello? You okay?" No answer. Kevin stood up, facing the woods. He wasn't smiling anymore. Didn't sound like they were in trouble. He whispered. Sounded like they were checking us out. That's when I realized something was off. The voice didn't sound panicked or lost. It sounded calm. Too calm. Like someone pretending to be casual. Kevin was already holding the flashlight, scanning the tree line where we thought the voice came from. The beam cut through branches and undergrowth, but didn't catch anything. No movement, no figure, no light reflection from eyes. I called out again. "Hello? You lost or something?" Still nothing. Just that same unnatural silence like the woods were holding their breath. Kevin muttered, "We'd have heard footsteps if someone walked up here. It's all dry leaves and gravel." He wasn't wrong. Even we had made noise walking around earlier. But whoever that was, if there even was someone, they had moved quietly, too quietly. We stood there for a few minutes, barely speaking. Eventually, Kevin shrugged like he was trying to brush it off. "Probably some weirdo hiker. Let's just keep the fire low and keep our knife nearby." That night, we didn't sleep much. We tried to. Zipped up in our tent, headlamps within reach, my hunting knife under my sleeping bag, and Kevin's speaker playing low static noise to block out the creepy silence. But around 2 a.m., I woke up needing to pee. I unzipped the tent quietly and stepped out with my flashlight. The woods looked different at night. Everything felt wrong. The trees looked too still, the air too dense, and even my own footsteps sounded muffled like the forest was swallowing sound. As I walked a few feet toward the bushes, I suddenly stopped. I heard it again. That voice. This time it was closer, much closer. "Hey, you dropped something." It was calm, right behind a large tree, maybe 10 to 12 feet away. I whipped the flashlight in that direction. Nothing, not a sound, no crunching leaves, no footsteps running away, just my breath fogging in front of me and the sound of blood pounding in my ears. I backed up slowly toward the tent, eyes never leaving that tree. Kevin unzipped the flap as soon as I got close. "Dude, was that the voice again?" he whispered. I nodded. It was right there this time. We sat up the rest of the night, wide awake, clutching our flashlights. But nothing else happened. No more voices, no rustling, nothing. Eventually, around dawn, we passed out from sheer exhaustion. When we woke up, it was already mid-morning. The sky was gray, the forest covered in a thin mist, and everything felt off again, like we had overstayed in a place that didn't want us there. Kevin went to get water from a nearby stream, and I stayed back to clean up some of the gear. That's when I noticed it. Next to our fire pit, in the dirt, someone had drawn a circle. Not huge, maybe 3 feet wide, but it was clearly intentional. A perfect circle, etched shallow into the dirt with what looked like a stick or sharp stone. Inside the circle were footprints, bare footprints, human. They weren't ours. We had hiking boots on the entire time, but these were bare, slightly sunken into the cold dirt. 5 toes, wide soles. Someone had been standing inside that circle, silently, while we slept. My stomach dropped. I shouted for Kevin to come back. He ran over, and when he saw the footprints, his whole expression changed. "We need to leave," he said immediately. "Right now." We didn't pack properly. We just shoved everything into the back of the car and peeled out. I didn't even care if we left trash or forgot gear. I just wanted to be out of there. As we drove away down that long gravel trail, I checked my phone. No signal. Until we hit the main road, nearly 30 minutes later. That's when Kevin told me something he hadn't shared before. I looked over at him. "What do you mean, saw something?" He didn't take his eyes off the road. There was someone standing near the tent. I didn't see a face, just a shape. Tall, maybe 6 feet 5 inches or more. Way taller than us. And it was just watching, standing completely still. I blinked, and it was gone. I thought I imagined it, until you told me about that voice. I didn't know what to say. My skin went cold. That meant someone had been standing outside our tent, watching us sleep. And that voice, whatever it was, whoever it was, it wasn't trying to be friendly. It knew we were scared. It was enjoying it. We made it back to the city without talking much. But that week we both started experiencing weird things. I'd hear faint knocking at my apartment door in the middle of the night. Kevin said his dog would bark at the corner of his room every night at exactly 3 a.m., the same time he claimed to have seen that thing in the woods. A few days later, Kevin called me, freaking out. He'd woken up to muddy, bare footprints in his hallway, right inside his apartment. They led from the front door to his bedroom, then stopped at the foot of his bed. The front door was still locked. That night, I slept with the lights on. I didn't even try to sleep, to be honest. The next morning, we both met up at a diner and talked seriously for the first time. We decided to do some digging on that forest. Turns out Bear Ridge had a history. Back in the 70s, there were reports of hikers going missing. Locals believed in a presence in the woods. Some called it the Watcher. Others believed it was tied to ancient ritualistic symbols drawn by cults who once lived in those remote areas. One article mentioned a circle of barefoot prints found near one of the last known campsites before a man went missing. Same size, same symbol. The man was never found. We tried to forget it after that, tried to move on. We even stopped hanging out for a while, not because of any fight, but because we just didn't want to talk about what happened. It felt like acknowledging it gave it more power. It's been over a year now. Kevin moved to another city. He doesn't talk about that trip anymore. As for me, sometimes when I try to sleep, I still hear a voice just outside my window. Very quiet, just enough to freeze me in place. Hey, you dropped something. But I never dropped anything, and I never ever opened the window. This story was told to me by an old co-worker, Jack. He wasn't the kind of guy who'd talk about ghosts or horror. He was ex-military, built like a tank, and had this very grounded, no-nonsense personality. So when he told me this, I listened, because he wasn't trying to scare me. He looked like he was still scared. Back in 2012, Jack and two of his army buddies, Nate and Miller, decided to go on a weekend camping trip in the Pacific Northwest. They picked a remote patch of wilderness that Nate had found on a kayaking trip once. Completely off-grid. No cell phone reception, no nearby rangers, nothing. Just a clearing near a shallow riverbed surrounded by towering trees and thick moss. Exactly the kind of place where you're alone. The first night was normal. Beers, stories around the fire, laughter echoing off the trees. But Jack said there was this off feeling in the air. The way the wind moved through the branches, it was oddly silent. No crickets, no frogs by the river, just the sound of their fire crackling. Still, they ignored it. Guys like that don't spook easy. But things shifted the second day. They went deeper into the forest, following the river upstream. At one point, they found these weird gouges in the bark of several trees. Not claw marks exactly, but like someone had raked the wood away with sharp sticks or tools. Too high for an animal. They joked about Bigfoot and moved on. Then, while filtering water by the river, Nate looked down and saw something buried just beneath the clear stream. At first glance, it looked like a bundle of rags. But as he nudged it with a stick, something floated up. It was a piece of fabric, wrapped tightly around what looked like a small doll, handmade, with a stone for a head. Miller called it some voodoo shit and wanted to leave immediately. Jack agreed. They burned the fire hotter that night and kept their rifles close. At some point after midnight, Jack woke up to a sound he couldn't explain. It was like wet dragging, like something heavy sliding across damp ground. But every time he unzipped the tent to look, there was nothing. The fire had died out, and the woods were black as pitch. Then came the smell, like stagnant water and rotting meat. So strong it made him gag. He figured it was a dead animal nearby and went back inside the tent. But just as he started drifting off, he heard the wet dragging again, this time closer, and then A voice, a raspy, gravelly whisper from just outside the tent. "Is it warm inside?" He froze. So did Nate and Miller. No one moved. Jack said the air felt like it thickened, like the oxygen had been sucked out. They stayed absolutely still, barely breathing. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. They finally worked up the courage to open the flap with their rifles drawn. There was no one there, just that awful smell. And outside the tent, about 10 feet away in the dirt, were long drag marks, deep grooves leading from the trees toward their camp. They looked like someone had pulled themselves across the ground, using their elbows. Jack said the worst part. The marks stopped right at the tent entrance, but there were no footprints leading away. At first light, they packed up. No breakfast, no joking. Just 3 trained soldiers moving fast and silent through the woods, rifles slung tight. They didn't even speak until they were a good mile away from the campsite. Jack said the forest didn't feel like it had changed. It was still unnaturally silent. No birds, no bugs, just the sound of their boots crunching the undergrowth and the river running somewhere behind them. They reached a ridgeline around noon, and that's when they realized something terrifying. They were lost. Nate, who'd been the one navigating, swore up and down that they were heading in the right direction, but the landscape wasn't matching anything they'd seen on the way in. Trees were gnarled in strange shapes. The ground had unfamiliar patches of moss, and the river they thought they were following had vanished. They argued for a bit, tension running high. Jack said he'd never seen Miller that on edge. The guy was twitching at every noise, hand never leaving the grip of his sidearm. And that's when they heard it again, the wet, dragging sound. But this time, it was coming from multiple directions, like something circling them, sliding across the forest floor just out of sight. Then came the voices, not just one, several, whispering, some speaking English, others in gibberish. A few were imitating their own voices, like someone had recorded them and was playing them back. Jack said he lost it at that point. He fired a shot in the direction of one of the sounds. It echoed through the woods, loud, harsh, final. Everything went quiet again, but only for a moment. Then something moved in the trees. They didn't get a good look, just a flash of a shape, pale, long-limbed, dragging itself low to the ground like it didn't have proper legs. Whatever it was big. 7 feet at least. Its skin looked slick and tight, like it had just crawled out of something. They ran. No formation, no planning, just pure panic. Branches slashed their arms, roots nearly broke their ankles, but they didn't stop. Jack said he could hear that thing moving behind them, not running, not walking, just sliding. After what felt like an hour, they stumbled into a clearing, and there it was. Nate's old, rusted pickup truck. Somehow they'd looped back to where they parked. None of them questioned it. They threw their gear in, jumped inside, and drove without speaking. Not even music. Not until they hit the first paved road 40 minutes later. Then Miller, from the back seat, whispered, "Look in the rear view." Jack glanced up. At first he saw nothing. Then the taillight caught something standing in the middle of the road behind them, half shrouded in mist. It was that same creature, tall, slouched, covered in mud and moss. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at a strange angle like it was broken. No face, just a gaping black hole where one should have been. And worst of all, it was holding the fabric-wrapped doll they'd found in the riverbed. Jack said the second he saw that thing in the rear view, holding the doll like it belonged to it, he stomped the gas. The truck fishtailed on the dirt road, but caught traction fast. No one looked back again. They drove in total silence, It took them over 4 hours to reach the nearest small town with a gas station. When they pulled in, they looked like they'd seen a ghost. Pale, eyes bloodshot, lips dry and cracked. They didn't talk to the clerk. They didn't even use the bathroom. They just refilled the tank, got bottled water, and left. Later that night in the motel, Miller finally said something. Just one sentence. That thing wasn't just wandering the woods. It knew we were coming. Nate didn't say a word the whole night. Jack couldn't sleep. He sat upright in bed, watching the window, half expecting to see that long, stretched-out creature outside, dragging itself across the parking lot. But the worst part? It followed them. Not physically. Not like in the movies. It was subtler. A week after they got back home, Nate called Jack late at night, whispering into the phone, terrified. He said he'd been hearing footsteps on his roof. Not rats, human footsteps, bare feet, pacing back and forth from midnight until 3 a.m. every night. Jack thought he was just rattled, until Miller called him the next day, panicking, saying he'd found muddy fingerprints on the inside of his second-floor bedroom window. No sign of forced entry, no footprints outside. And then Jack himself started hearing the whispers again, from the tree line behind his house, from the drain in his bathroom, from the vents when the heater kicked on. Always faint, always just beyond recognition, but sometimes they'd speak his name. He moved houses, changed his number, cut off all contact. But the doll, that image of the thing holding the doll, never left him. And sometimes, late at night, when he's lying awake in his new house, far away from the forest, far from Miller and Nate, he still hears the sound of something wet dragging across the floorboards. The way he tells it now, he doesn't even consider that trip a camping story. He says it was an invitation they didn't realize they accepted, and something out there, whatever it was, is still waiting for them to come back. This story was told to me by a guy named Morgan, a former wildlife surveyor who used to work solo across national forests in the Pacific Northwest. The kind of guy who preferred old cabins to hotels and thunder to silence. He swears this happened during a 3-day trip to a region locals call Devil's Hollow, a dense stretch of forest that doesn't show up clearly on most maps. It's known for its unusually cold air, even in summer, and the fact that no birds sing there. Not one. Morgan had hiked deep into the area to check water sources and plant populations, standard environmental survey stuff. He said he felt off the second he entered the forest. The usual forest sounds, rustling squirrels, bird calls, buzzing insects, went dead silent after a certain point. Not gradually, just gone. It was mid-autumn, so he figured maybe the seasonal shift had done it. He kept hiking. By the time he reached the spot marked on his survey map, the clouds had rolled in heavy. Cold rain started falling. Not a drizzle, more like a slow, soaking downpour, the kind that sinks into your clothes and your bones. He found an old ranger's shelter, a small wooden shack, likely built back in the 60s or 70s. It wasn't maintained anymore, but it had 4 walls, a roof, and a cot. That was enough. Morgan set up camp inside the structure, boiled water, and tried to get some rest. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, while the rain came down in sheets and the trees swayed like they were whispering secrets, he heard footsteps crunching the wet forest floor. Heavy footsteps, rhythmic, deliberate. At first he thought maybe another surveyor had wandered out there, but the pacing never changed. It didn't approach. It didn't leave. It just kept circling the shack over and over again. Morgan waited an hour, The steps kept going. He finally gathered his courage, turned off his lantern, and peeked through a crack in the wooden boards near the window. What he saw made his skin go ice cold. There was a figure standing maybe 20 feet away, barely visible in the storm, tall, so tall it shouldn't have been human. It stood just beyond the clearing, facing the shack, not moving, not blinking, not reacting to the rain pouring over its body. Morgan said the figure's arms hung too low, reaching nearly to its knees, and the way its head tilted, it was like it was listening. He dropped back down behind the window and waited, heart pounding, soaked in cold sweat. But the figure never came closer. The footsteps returned, but they didn't circle now. They were right outside the door. Morgan said those footsteps outside the shack stopped so suddenly it made his ears ring. He waited in total silence, barely breathing, heart thundering against his ribs. Then a single knock came at the door. Not a pounding, not an aggressive slam, just one slow knock, and then another knock, knock, knock. He didn't move, didn't answer, didn't dare make a sound, and yet whoever or whatever was outside didn't leave. The knocking stopped, but the presence remained. Then came something even worse, something that made Morgan genuinely believe he was about to die. He heard his own voice speaking from the other side of the door. It said, "Morgan, let me in." Same tone, same cadence, like a perfect recording of something he'd said before. Then again louder, "Morgan, let me in." Morgan said he almost passed out from fear. His mind raced. Was it some sort of animal mimicking human speech? A hallucination from being out in the rain too long? But deep down, he said he knew it wasn't anything natural. He backed away from the door, sat with his back against the opposite wall, clutching the camping knife he'd barely used in years. Then something ran across the roof, fast. He said it wasn't footsteps. It was more like claws scraping over wet wood, moving from one end of the shack to the other. Then it stopped. He waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The rain never let up. Eventually, sometime past 3 a.m., he passed out, knife still in hand, flashlight dead, soaked in sweat. And when he woke up, silence. Sunlight was bleeding through the cracks. The storm had passed. He cautiously opened the shack door and stepped outside. Nothing was there. No footprints in the mud. No damage. No signs that anyone or anything had ever been there. But right in front of the shack, in the middle of the clearing, something had been drawn into the mud with a single, long finger. A spiral, rough, uneven, as if someone had etched it into the earth with something sharp. A perfect spiral, leading inward. Morgan said he didn't touch it, didn't photograph it, just packed up and left without breakfast. But here's the part that disturbed me most. When he got home a few days later and took a hot shower, scrubbing all the mud and stink off his skin, he noticed something behind his ear. A faint, pink scar in the shape of a spiral.